there needs to be greater transparency in terms of the impact that companies are having, whether it's food companies or other types of companies. There needs to be greater transparency that what's their real cost. If companies can be more proactive in distributing the capitalism that the gains of capitalism that they experience, then I think that's a very sustainable model for the future. But I think in terms of where we're at, I also think, we're in a new industry. We're pioneering, so we're taking a whole bunch of different types of risk. But I fundamentally believe the long-term sustainability of capitalism will require greater inclusion.
Friends, welcome to an IBC Impact interview. This is an interview we recorded actually a couple years ago. As some of you are aware, we are doing a massive relaunch. We have invested and upgraded all of our technologies. So I'm actually re-recording this intro right now. You will see the interview is not of the same quality from a technical perspective of our most recent interview and then any future interview starting with Alessandro DeSanto. That's because we've gotten more technical capabilities, technologies have improved. With that said, the content is great still. Our person we've interviewed, Joe Rehmann, has so much fantastic information. And so I wanted to re-record this introduction, and then it will be on the old method, but we do hope you enjoy this. Joe Rehmann is a fantastic individual. He's actually got an incredible story because came from Notre Dame. He worked in banking, worked in private equity, so very much that the industries, traditional industries students come out of and seek to get into. And similar to actually Alessandro, if you watch that interview, then left for something very incredible. So he now lives in South Africa and started a sustainable tilapia fish farm called Victory Farms. And what's so powerful about it, it's growing rapidly. I believe it is the largest growing or the fastest growing in South Africa or in Africa as a whole. If it isn't, it's close to. On top of that, he's designed it, as you'll hear in the interview, in a way that impacts the employees in a powerful way, but then also impacts the environment, not by minimizing its footprint, but actually by being carbon. It's been a while since I've recorded, but I think carbon negative. It takes carbon out of the environment. And so it is a distinct privilege. I'm excited to have him here today. And, well, recorded a while ago, but I'm excited for you guys to watch this interview. And I hope you guys love this. And I hope you guys enjoy the interview. So enjoy.
Thanks for having me on.
Joe, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
I was born in Egypt, and I spent 50% living abroad in a bunch of different countries, and then another 50% living in a small little farm in Wisconsin. So doing the hobby farm, chickens, goats, cows thing. So that being said, I have two Notre Dame parents, or St. Mary's Notre Dame parents, and so I was indoctrinated from a very early age. It's a familiar story, and also a grandpa who'd gone to Notre Dame too. So I'd always wanted to attend Notre Dame. So that was a very easy decision-making process that brought me to South Bend. And then, I guess my Notre Dame experience was really, really influenced and in many ways defined by my experience with the SIBC. And going through that and getting a chance, I was very fortunate to be able to do a position in Poland, teaching English, and then getting more involved on the internship side and went to Thailand and did something there too. And that was really formative for me. And it also helped shape what I wanted to do coming out of Notre Dame. I was a liberal arts major, but I never wanted to necessarily go straight into being a career diplomat or something. So what I did was I was very much inspired by some of the SIBC guys who'd gone ahead of me. And so I took that somewhat traditional route through Wall Street, and then quickly decided to try a time at Microsoft, which I didn't enjoy. And then I went back onto the investment banking side, where I spent a little over 4 years at a smaller firm out on the West Coast. And coming out of that, it was basically that passion that was inside me, this peace through commerce notion, had never left me. I always wanted to try and find a way to get back into doing something that I was aligned with my core passion. And I think banking, especially banking through the financial crisis and surviving, was a very interesting experience. A ton of exposure to a lot of different scenarios. So not just IPOs, but also bankruptcies and restructurings. So I got a nice look at the corporate side from a few different ways. But then I always wanted to get out of the U.S. and find a way to have a more meaningful impact with the types of work that I thought I wanted to do. So getting an MBA made a lot of sense for me. Getting an MBA, because I didn't have any real business experience at Notre Dame or business education at Notre Dame, the MBA was a good next step. So I went to INSEAD because it is really the most international MBA option out there, and it's also a year. So going to INSEAD, I had my aim was to come out of it and focus on the overlap of private equity, food, and Sub-Saharan Africa. I'd done a few food deals, and I quite liked, I think also growing up on a farm, I also just quite like agriculture in general, growing things and growing animals. And so, so for me, that was the aim. And I was very lucky in the end, through a whole battery of MBA interviews, I ended up in touch with Tim Noonan. And Tim was like, okay, Joe, I get you, private equity, food, Africa. How about a fish deal in Ghana? And it was like, all right, that sounds like it's right in the crosshairs of what I'm trying to do. So Tim invited me to go do due diligence on his behalf. And so I moved out to Ghana for 3 months, did some due diligence on a target out there. And that ended up taking me down a very unexpected path. So I at the end of those 3 months, there was an opportunity to stay on with that organization, which at the time, it was the second largest fish farm in Sub-Saharan Africa, actually in all of Africa. And so really it was like, okay, I can stay on as the CFO of that business and try to help get this deal done. So I still really had like my iBanking or private equity hat on at that point, and I really wanted to get this deal through the finish line. I ended up staying there for 3 years. So we never got the deal done. Tried again, and so that was a very long slog to get really zero capital raised. But it introduced me to a sector, and I think Tim was really great in in opening my eyes to not just focusing on the PE side of what I wanted to do, but actually looking at it from a more operational perspective. And getting as deep as I got into the Ghanaian entity, it really opened my eyes to how big of an opportunity there is in Sub-Saharan, not just in food in general, because that's probably quite obvious, but in the white protein space. And the white protein space, there's significant malnourishment. Africa doesn't even come close to feeding itself. There are a whole bunch of social and development aspects that are tied and intertwined into the food security and all of the aspects related to it, anything from climate change to global policy, trade policy. All of these things become interwoven in it. And then, of course, local politics is largely driven off of youth unemployment and lack of food, lack of jobs. So these things all spur on civil unrest. So all of these factors together play a big role in creating stability in young and fragile democracies. And so I really looked at that as a very direct way that I could get involved in helping to, especially a country like Ghana, which is it's often the poster child democracy of Sub-Saharan Africa. So it was the first one to get independence, and for a variety of reasons, it's shown resilience within its own democracy. So I really looked at being able to enable food security through something as basic as providing access to proteins, animal proteins, as actually quite a significant way that we could help stabilize these regions. And of course, it's a fantastic business opportunity because it probably should grow on the scale of 20x during our careers, probably 20 to 30x. So there's a very nice growth in that segment. And so I spent on and off there. Really, I was CFO for 3 years. And then coming out of it, I guess where I was at in my conversations with Tim got longer and longer. I really wanted to do it with sustainability at the core. And I think that I don't know exactly what that jargon means to each individual, but to me, it means that you actually track what your environmental footprint is. And as you grow, your environmental footprint should actually be positive. And it's not just about reducing the bad things that you do. I think no matter how you look at it, you could even put like a priest robe on and say like, like, should we just, no, you actually should do good. You should flip this whole notion that we should just reduce the bad that we're doing environmentally. And so the business that I was at in Ghana, I don't think it took sustainability from an environmental and from a social standpoint very seriously. And it was really just focused on the financial side. And so my view was that this can be a fantastic engine that we can replicate across Sub-Saharan Africa for development across those metrics, across all three. And so I did a little bit of homework, and of course Lake Victoria is not so hard to find on a map. And so I was always aware that Lake Victoria was potentially one of the greatest resources for producing tropical fish, tropical freshwater fish, and specifically probably tilapia. So I did a little bit of homework on it. Went from Ghana to Kenya, spent a bit of time in Kenya, and after a few months of diligence and basically mostly market side diligence rather than lakeside diligence, came to the conclusion that there was a market opportunity within this region. And then I went back and found the guy who built the Ghanaian business, so not the CEO, but the number two guy who slept on the farm for 7 years. I brought him over to Kenya and said, let's now take a look at the technical feasibility of opening a fish farm here. And we were very lucky to find a sponsor. So we ended up working with a DFID-backed group called Musingi, and they basically said, look, we don't really know what you guys are going to come up with, but we'd just like to see it. And we're like, well, okay, we'll be, you'll obviously get like professional integrity from us. We also don't know what we're going to come up with. And at this point, I wasn't convinced that I felt like leaving the kind of the safe world and entering the entrepreneurial world. So I needed to convince myself that this was a good idea. And so then we spent a few more months in a boat and cruising around Lake Victoria, doing rather more like technical and aquacultural due diligence, and came away. There were a lot of myths about Lake Victoria. So without getting into all of them, but basically the prevailing view is that Lake Victoria is not suitable for large scale commercial aquaculture. And so after we spent a few months on the water, we took a different view, which was parts of Lake Victoria are not suitable, but it's an enormous lake, and the lake behaves like many lakes because of the way the water flows. And so there are parts of Lake Victoria that are actually fantastic for aquaculture. So of course we needed to prove that and convince a number of investors that this hypothesis could hold. But then also coming away, we had our business plan, we presented it to Musingi, all was well. But then I needed to get some sort of confirmation in my own mind that this was the right path. And that was, again, I reached out to a few members of IBC who'd always been mentors to me. And I wanted to get a group of investors who wouldn't qualify as friends and family, that really more qualify as professional network. I guess within IBC, it's maybe a safer world, but still guys who are going to take a pretty commercial look at what we're doing and have a lot of investing experience on their own. Maybe not so much in Kenya, but certainly around the world. And so some of the guys who then were really excited about what we were doing include names like Ryan Kerrigan and Dave Wilson. And so together with those guys and several other investors, we put together a seed round, got our permitting taken care of. So that ended up taking a little over 6 months, and then started operations. And from starting operations, so basically we started operations in June of 2016. And from June of 2016 to February of 2017, we went from 0 fish in the water to over 1 million fish in the water. From not on the map to number 1 in Kenya. And so our goal is now, if we can maintain the trajectory we've had over the last 8 months for the next 8 months, which we have pretty positive indications of, yes, but always knock on wood in aquaculture. It's a live thing with chemistry and biology all involved, and politics. But if we can maintain that, we will take the number 1 spot in East Africa by Christmas. So, and if we can get those things done, then I think we've shown that this model can work very effectively, very quickly toward cash flow positive and achieve the sustainability goals that we've put at the core of what we're doing in terms of environmental and social practices, which we think are best in world. So we recognize that's a very high bar, but that's it's central to what we do, so that as we expand, that impact is connected to our growth curve.
Joe, can you share where you see Victory Farms 3 years, 5 years, from a business perspective, but then also the impact that you want to have through Victory Farms?
Yeah, so I think it's worth breaking into categories. So on the environmental side, and then on the social side. Obviously, the financial side, we need to make money. We need to have commercial returns to attract more capital. But on the environmental side, I think it boils down to a very simple metric: are we emitting carbon, or are we sinking carbon? And of course, you can look at that in a variety of different ways. But we can calculate what the CO2 footprint is for animal production globally. And the UN FAO estimates that up to 25% of global CO2 output is related to human animal consumption. If that makes sense, but the humans eating animals. So what that means is it's one of the major pillars of CO2 emissions. Without getting into the details there, that has created the conventional wisdom, that kind of the mere fact that that's a quarter of our emissions has created the conventional wisdom that humans consuming animal protein must emit CO2. Those businesses are just going to be CO2 emitters, and we'd all better really be careful about what's going to happen in countries that are only eating 5 to 10% of the animal protein that they should be eating, because when they finally catch up to American or Western standards, global CO2 is going to go through the roof, which certainly we've seen in some areas. So that being said, yeah, that's what we're challenging. Is we're saying I don't personally believe that that businesses should just take that for granted. I think businesses should be challenged such that the challenge is to actually sink carbon. So every fish we sell should sink carbon, and it's that simple. And if we can create that standard, I've met with a number of the larger fish players in the world, and they more or less laugh at Africa. Like, you guys are so small, you're never going to reach, tens of thousands, and certainly not hundreds of thousands of tons of production. It's just kind of a joke. And who are you going to feed? No one has any money anyways. So, we can challenge them from, challenge the old colonialist views, and we can also challenge these environmental views. And what I'd like to do is go back and meet these guys, and even as soon as kind of 12 or 18 months from now, and say, look, not only are we showing a trajectory that's serious, and we're on the map, and in terms of margins and everything else, we're competitive, but we're doing it all while we sink carbon. And why don't you guys help me understand whether you're ravaging the oceans and just taking things for free while wrecking all the reefs, or you're doing commercial aquaculture, but using high inclusion rates of fish meal and little regard to your soy meals, which are also very CO2 intensive. Let's talk about that. And I think we can almost really turn the table on these guys and show them and challenge them and say, look, Africa can leapfrog. And in a variety of industries, Africa has leapfrogged. Now, of course, that's only a couple, basically mobile and maybe mobile payments. But it could very well do it in solar energy too. Certainly, we're seeing signs of that. But I think it can do it in meat production. And I think if we do it through tilapia, which can be produced at reasonably small scales, so it can therefore take advantage of water bodies all throughout the region, I think we can show people that, there's no reason why eating animals has to have a net CO2 increase in the world. So I think that environmentally, that gets us very excited. There's a number of things we need to accomplish over the next 12 months to achieve those targets, but they're all very realistic. We can take it in bite sizes. And then on the social side, we're probably going to have somewhere between 700 and 1,000 employees by the time we hit our 10,000 ton mark, which that's our 6-year business plan. We're a year and a half in, and we're on track to crush 10,000 tons. So we will probably be closer to 15 by the time we hit 6 years. So at the end of all of this, if all we've done is kind of, is capitalism has made two people, me and my business partner, very wealthy, I really don't think capitalism is working. And the trickle down effect is, it's kind of a belief almost. But I think we have to be more conscientious in our design of how we want capitalism to work in order to distribute the benefits across everybody who's involved, rather than just maybe the guys who are the torchbearers. And so what we've done, and I don't think maybe from an American perspective it feels that innovative, but I think from an African perspective, the fact that we even have employees is remarkable. Most companies of our size, we have 100 staff now. Most companies of our size, they don't even hire people. They just keep them as casuals. They rotate through them. Why have health benefits? Why have retirement benefits? Why have any of these things? So on the African context, we're quite bold by taking staff. Possibly naive, but we really believe if we can bring these people on board, treat them well, train them, and incentivize them through what we'll talk about in a second, but our employee partner program, which is kind of an equity-like product for all the staff to share. our view is that we're going to create a fantastic work environment, and theft and other things will actually go down, which are major issues in this continent when you've got a large staff. So, and on the employee partner program, again, I think there are a number of companies in the States that do offer equity or equity-like incentives to staff that stay. In Africa, it's virtually unheard of. And I think also the scale and magnitude at which we're doing it, we have kind of a unique opportunity to be very impactful. So if we look at what the average wealth is of someone who we hire in the village, we're finding their average wealth is about $250 per person. That's total net worth. So a variety of assets that they own. They may own a small clay hut. They may, clay hut with a thatch roof or maybe a half rusted roof. They almost certainly have a mobile phone that's probably worth $5 to $10. They may have a few cattle, a few skinny cows that might be worth $80 to $150, and then a few goats worth $20 or $30. If you see a guy herding 12 cattle, there's a very good chance he doesn't own them. He's actually just the herder boy who's herding it for the wealthier guy on the hill. So what we found, and whatever their value of the land is, we found that that's almost totally negligible, because 94% of people in Kenya don't actually own the land that they think that they own. It's actually stuck in a legal system, and the costs of resolving it from the legal system are greater than the value of the land, which is certainly what we've experienced in our region. Is they may have to spend $500 to $1,000 just to unlock their parcel from a legal quagmire. And their plot's only worth 500. So it doesn't ever make sense to do that unless you're someone like us who can actually realize greater gains from land. So all those things with a $250 net worth, our view is, so we basically carved a pool of capital aside. If we hit our targets, we hit our goals, we want to have $2.5 million in that pool, which all of our investors have signed off on. Of course, it's contingent on hitting targets, but if we can hit those targets, $2.5 million goes into that pool. We hit 10,000 tons, and it triggers a payout, and it won't be a cash payout. It will be probably mostly in kind, in other forms of assets, but basically a value transfer of 2,000. So if we had 1,000 staff, that's $2,500 per person. So that is a 10 times wealth multiplier, and those are really the numbers that we want to hit. I don't think it's very interesting, and I get very critical of companies here that are saying, oh, we're doing really great CSR. We built a school. We got free T-shirts for the village. It's like, guys, the school's empty. There's no teachers in the school. There's no data. There's no textbooks. There aren't kids in the classrooms. So it just doesn't – we can build a school for $1,500. What does that change? We can buy some T-shirts for people, and they will wear those T-shirts every single day, and within 2 years, the T-shirts all have holes in them. So we want to do something that really creates lasting change. And I think part of that equation, certainly not all of it, but part of that equation is this like a magnitude order change on wealth. And the things that people will do with that increased wealth, so far what we're seeing with what people are spending wages on, what our staff are spending wages on, is very encouraging. Certainly everybody goes out on payday and gets and lights up the town. That happens. So our staff, they have their badges, they wear them around at the bars, fine. But what's really impressive is our guys are one or two guys have rebuilt their home, so they have cement floors, they have real roofs, they have real walls. A couple people are now in college who weren't in college before, so a couple sisters and brothers are now in college of our staff. And what the mothers say who work at our company is, my kids are eating. And it's a real thing. If you guys get the chance to see some of the photos of the people we have working on our farm, it's very tough. It's more than 50% of our staff has HIV, and people are incredibly emaciated. And we've had a drought here for the last 2 years, and our region's been hit much harder than most. Plus, overfishing has cut the population of fish by more than half in 10 years. So we're dealing with acute starvation. So if you look at the cows, they're all dying. And that's not an exaggeration. They're just we see dead cows around us because people can't afford to feed their cows. And then certainly we see very, very skinny people, which is a combination of malnutrition, certainly just not enough calorie deficits, and HIV. So we look at that as, if we can deliver a 10 times wealth multiplier, I think we're starting to engage at a level where we're making long-term lasting change in the region. Of course, we've got to play that out and see what happens and measure it. But I think it's a very exciting change.
Joe, why do you think other fish farms aren't doing what you guys are doing, particularly from the sustainability perspective?
I think it's a very complicated question, and it would be difficult to answer in kind of a blanket statement. because it's in any industry and any geography, it's going to be kind of comprised of different variables, and the maturity of the industry will also define its level of competitiveness and how consolidated or kind of, and that will define some of the different types of opportunities that exist in a region. So what I would challenge the fish guys with is pretty tough. We're down of large oceanic species, pelagic species that swim in the open waters. We're down 90% from where our parents were at when they were born. And to me, that's just totally unacceptable. So I would challenge some of those industries very hard. If you eat a shrimp from in the U.S., which is increasingly farmed, but if you eat one that's wild caught in the Gulf of Mexico, the equivalent of 2 other shrimp, but in the form of dolphins, turtles, other marlin, other heavy species, like what I would consider beautiful species, but other large species that are not part of what they want to catch, that goes out and it's truly waste product. It's dead. And why they don't grind, a few of them grind it up and turn it into fish meal, which is at least it's reused in the system, but for many they just dump. And for me, so I would challenge the fish industry very hard. Anyone who's doing wild catch fishing, even line caught fishing, even it sounds quite nice, but if you have 2,000 hooks and you grab virtually everything that comes in your web of hooks, it's not a whole lot different from trawling, okay, except for the reef areas. But so I would challenge fishing very hard and say I think there is a moral obligation for these industries to work together to improve packaging, improve labeling, so that consumers can make a choice. If consumers still want to ravage oceans, fine. Then we just, I don't know, we need to work on our society. But if consumers have a choice and they have real transparency into what they're eating and the impact that that's had on the environment, then there's too many consumers now who are going to say, wow, for an extra 5%, I can have something that's properly produced. It's an easy choice. And the cost differences aren't that high. But if somebody's fishing for, wild catch, then I would seriously challenge them. If somebody's doing fish farming, then it enters a spectrum where there needs to be greater transparency in terms of the impact that companies are having, whether it's food companies or other types of companies. There needs to be greater transparency that what's their real cost, right? And I think we need to be more open about all of the forms of cost that exist, whether it's abuse of labor, abuse of environment, or whatever. I think consumers would make much better choices given better information. But I think in terms of where we're at, I also think we're in a new industry. We're pioneering, so we're taking a whole bunch of different types of risk. But I fundamentally believe the long-term sustainability of capitalism will require greater inclusion. And a lot of the problems that we're seeing in different parts of the West are related to income inequality and wealth inequality. And those are problems that, there are different ways of managing those problems. And whether you kind of lean toward Piketty's side of the equation with a global tax on wealth, I don't know if I agree with that. I probably strongly disagree with that. It's just to take a cheesy Einstein quote, but it's compound interest is the greatest force known to man. Why would we dampen that? Why wouldn't we harness it and use it for more good? So my view is Piketty's right in the sense that this is Piketty's capitalism in the 21st century. I think Piketty's right in that income inequality is getting worse, especially in the U.S. We're starting to look a lot like 19th century Europe, and we need to be proactive in how we manage that. I think Piketty's dead wrong that we should have a global tax on wealth that will have all sorts of unintended consequences. So I think a company like ours, and I think there are a lot of other companies emerging that have similar views as us in terms of what the next generation of companies should look like. But it's that for its sustainability on the financial side, it means financial inclusion. And that for us it's really important. And I think if countries like Kenya have a choice to make, they can either follow the autocratic capitalist model of China, which is incredibly successful. And there's other countries in the region, like Uganda, which have certainly shown levels of success with these sorts of strongman leaders. And a lot of countries are leaning toward that sphere because of how effective it can be. Or they can pick more of a liberal market capitalism approach, but that's very difficult to develop. And you do get these situations where you get these incredibly wealthy people, whether it's Dangote in Africa or there are different tycoons in each region. that's not a great example. That's not inspirational. It's not fair. It doesn't engender the types of benefits of capitalism that I think we all want to see. So I think if companies can be more proactive, and consumers can also be proactive in their choice of product, but if companies can be more proactive in distributing the capitalism that the gains of capitalism that they experience, then I think that's a very sustainable model for the future.
Joe, you've gone from banking to private equity to Africa, which is a stint at Microsoft in there. And so I want to ask you, how did your banking time, how did your private equity time help prepare you for Africa?
Different people have different experiences in investment banking. It also depends a little bit on the team you're on and the company you're at, what function you do, all these things. But I think what's really important is getting that core skill set. And it doesn't really matter if it's banking or consulting. Probably there are a few other very good fields that are just very rigorous. And I think I would still encourage young people to join some of these larger banks or consulting companies because they get such exposure to a rigorous professional environment that teaches a level of discipline that you don't necessarily get in college. Maybe some folks are able to achieve that at the undergraduate level. Maybe I wasn't, but it teaches you such a level of professionalism that it doesn't really matter where you go or what side of the equation you want to do next, whether you want to be a policy worker, whether you want to be, foraging in the lakes of Africa. It's an incredibly transferable skill. So I think in some of the advice I got from IBC mentors on my side was just stick with it for a period of time. You're kind of just giving them a few years of your life. And do you have to do that? No, there are other ways to get involved. Absolutely. And I wouldn't say that there's one path to achieve this. Absolutely not. But if for someone who's already picked that path, I would say it is a fantastic route into doing what you're passionate about. And in your 20s, especially your early 20s, it's the right time to gain skills, to build your network, build your credibility, and that you will carry that with you for the rest of your career as a major asset that no one can ever assess how valuable it is. It will just come out naturally no matter what you do.
What would you say has allowed you or helped you become successful?
I don't consider myself successful in that sense. I think it's a journey, and I think at each step along the way, you kind of are either hitting the metrics that you want to be hitting, or you're missing, which is fine, but then you need to be aware of that and have the self-awareness and discipline to recorrect. And I don't think it's realistic for somebody throughout the entire course of their career to fire on all cylinders. I ended up at Microsoft for a year, which was really a total waste of 1 year. And I was very, very frustrated because a number of my friends were still in investment banking, and I thought, oh, geez, I'm now a whole year behind, and they're all going to get promoted ahead of me. It doesn't matter. That stuff doesn't matter. As long as you have the awareness to self-correct and the willingness to take risks, to put yourself back on the right path, those are the things that are really going to pay off. I really think these investments in yourself, and those come in a lot of different forms, whether it's going back for an MBA, going back for other types of schooling, that's a big bet on yourself, or other types of bets, whether it means, look, I'm really passionate about X, and even though my workplace I'm doing Y, I'm going to get engaged in social activities that are related to X or whatever it may be. Civic action groups, different volunteerism. I'm going to get really competent in X in parallel to my career in Y. And when the time comes, I'm tooled up. I can speak this language already, and then you're an obvious fit. I mean, I've interviewed a number of people I interview a lot of people who are very, very highly skilled. They come from one of the top consulting firms. And when I ask them why they want to be in Africa, it's a tough one. They don't really have a reason. I want to do good. Okay, that's great. Like, what are examples of how you've been engaged in that in your prior roles? And obviously these types of jobs, banking and consulting, are very demanding. So it's hard to be very active. But there are things you can do, and there are things that can demonstrate that. And so I think when I look at it, I think it's a willingness. It's a willingness to take bets on yourself in ways that maybe are unconventional. And it doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel or do something really phenomenal. It can even be as simple as maintaining a dialogue. Maintaining a dialogue with various thought leaders that you think are interesting, and eventually finding yourself in social circles where you can engage those people.
Joe, we like to finish interviews with some simpler questions. And the first one I want to begin with is, who is a business person that you look up to?
Maybe it's very much inside the box, very much inside the box. But I really like Elon Musk, and I'm sure everybody knows the story, so there's no point in going through it. But I guess what I really like about what he solves is he looks at things in a very simple way, and then says, okay, now let's actually focus on solving this in a way that, let's not look at how we can export more fish to Africa or what have you, catch more fish off the coast of Mozambique. Let's actually completely re-engineer the way we produce fish and the way we think about it. So, I mean, in a very small way, he inspires me to try to be more bold in solutions.
Joe, what's a book that you would recommend to the IBC community?
I saw your comments on that earlier, and I thought about it a bit, and I thought it was kind of a few different ways of thinking about it. And there's a couple of very good books on Africa. I like some of the older ones, actually. I think they're very good. So Richard Kapuscinski's written a couple. He has a really difficult Polish name. His books, in many ways, I think about him every day. When I'm in traffic, when I'm in the village, he has beautiful prose, but he was also a correspondent for a lot of prominent newspapers in Europe. Yep. And he's also got this very detailed approach. So I think if someone wants to read a book on Africa, I'd recommend any of his. And he has like a 40-year history of writing about different regions, but Africa as one of his main works. And then, but that's Africa. But I also think from an IBC perspective, I really think, I mentioned it earlier, but I really think Piketty's book is fantastic. And, it's a little bit like if you've ever read any, Karl Marx's work or some of the other great economists of our time. I might not agree with his conclusion. I don't think it's time for a revolution, and I certainly don't think it's time for global tax on wealth. But there are very many prescient ideas in there, and the simplicity of his writing and everything is very good. And I think we need to take it seriously. And I think we need to be very proactive in finding alternative solutions and feeding them to the debate floor. I don't know where the U.S. is at because I'm a bit disconnected, but certainly in Europe, these ideas are gaining a lot of traction. And I personally think it's the wrong approach. And I don't know if the IBC would have, I'm sure it wouldn't have a view on it, but I think it's good to have multiple views. If we can recognize this growing inequality is a major issue in developed countries and underdeveloped countries. And there's different ways we can work as a society to solve that. And that will definitely create different trajectories for long-term benefits of mankind, whether it's just growth or risk of war, risk of famine, all these sorts of things. So I think it's an incredibly well-written book, but I think my favorite part about it is it creates a debate, which is, well, okay, what are we going to do to solve it? It does need to be addressed.
All right, final question, Joe. If I were to sit down and cut you a check for $100 million, what would you do differently?
I'm hooked on this, right? This is a very strong form of addiction. I know exactly when my data is going to come in on fish for the day, on egg production, on feed rates, sales data comes in. So I'm hook, line, and sinker to use an obvious pun, but I'm involved in this business. I love it, and I think what it would actually just mean that I do things a bit differently. So what I'm really passionate about this business is the development angle. So what I would probably do is hire a CEO to do the really strong business side. And then I would get more involved on the development side. And how can we link community-related activities, which can be profit-making, to the overall business model of Victory Farms? There's lots of ways to do it, whether it's outgrow programs, small pond holding operations, can all contribute to the business in a profitable way. So how can we create more winners from this enterprise? And then how can we kind of link that to policy? And how can we start to think about how to connect kind of macro problems with macro solutions? So it would probably hopefully I end up there anyways, but it might just accelerate my path toward that.
Joe, I seriously can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your busy day to do this interview. I know it was extremely valuable. I know that listeners will enjoy it, and want to thank you for your insights.
Put in a small plug. We are a rapidly growing business. We have an enormous need for talent. And talent, right now we need talent across the entire spectrum. So there's pretty much any talent pool that Notre Dame or SIBC, IBC is creating. Almost any discipline would be valuable to us right now. And anything that comes in kind of a minimum chunk in terms of time can be valuable to us too, because then we just pair people up with Kenyans for knowledge transfer. So to the extent that anybody's interested in kind of, a very interesting development experience over here, the level of, for junior folks, the level of exposure that they would get would be fantastic. For more experienced folks, we would really benefit, and we could, in terms of how quickly we can do what we want to do. Some folks could come in and make a huge impact on us as an organization. So I would love to hear from anyone who's keen.
Absolutely, Joe. And so if any listeners here want to learn more about Victory Farms, feel free to reach out to me, either through email, through the website, the commenting section, any way possible, and I will be happy to put you in touch with Joe. Thank you so much, guys.